Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, the fake blog about Syria and how it helps the man it was trying to hurt, President Bashar al-Assad. Rwandan journalists still dealing with the ramifications of a 17-year-old story, the story of a genocide. Anonymous? Not really. Online activists arrested in both Turkey and Spain.
Hi guys, can I be your friend?
And coming face to face with the social norms of Facebook, our web video of the week.
All my friends have got like 180 friends. I've only got 2. Yeah.
For the past 6 months, the global news agenda has been dominated by the Arab uprisings. The coverage of those stories, television reports, and newspaper articles often consists of raw material provided by citizen journalists. 4 news organizations, many of whom have been locked out of stories by embattled governments. That material is both a godsend and a challenge to deal with. Verifying the authenticity of what is reaching them through the web is forcing news desks to develop a whole new skill set. Case in point, the story of the Syrian blogger, the self-described gay girl in Damascus, who, as it turns out, is really a straight man based in Scotland. It was a well-known blog, and readers were alarmed by a recent post saying that she had been abducted by Syrian security forces. But the story began to unravel. And although the real author, Tom McMaster, says he was just trying to draw attention to the crackdown on activists by the Assad government, he may well have damaged the cause he says he was trying to support. Depending on how you look at it. Our starting point this week is either Damascus or Edinburgh. The story of an online deception that provided the Syrian government with a propaganda triumph.
I live in Damascus, Syria. It's a repressive police state. Most LGBT people are still deep in the closet, or staying as invisible as possible.
An Arab gay girl in an Arab capital reporting on an uprising. It provides a very attractive character for journalists to report on and for readers to relate to.
I have set up a blog announcing my sexuality, with my name and my photo. Am I crazy? Maybe.
Many people started to raise doubts, began to say, wait, something doesn't smell quite right about this story.
A source told me that they were very close to the local lesbian and gay community in Damascus, and they'd asked around and no one had heard of her.
The fact that journalists are not in Syria also adds to the problem. We could not call her and say, okay, where are you? Can we meet in a coffee shop?
Right now, as we enter the 3rd month of the uprising, there are demonstrations underway in Homs.
The blog definitely seemed to tell a really compelling story of what it was like to be a gay woman living in Damascus.
The internet was down for virtually the whole country for a day
and came back on yesterday.
The only problem is that none of it was true.
Tom McMaster had been living a lie, blogging a lie. After he was outed, admitting that he was a straight American man rather than a gay Arab woman, he apologized.
I didn't mean to harm anyone who was upset. I didn't mean to hurt the causes I believe in. My intentions were good. I only wanted to set forth real information through the use of artfully crafted fiction. I ignored the consequences of my action. I am sorry.
He definitely had hurt the case and the credibility of online activism, especially in Syria. The government had all along been saying that many of these online activists actually don't live in Syria. They fabricate stories. It's false stories.
The Assad regime has already jumped onto this story and have pointed to it as an example of Western propaganda. Here, look, there's an American who's pretending to be an activist in the country. So if we can't believe him anymore, why should we believe any of these other activists? In one fell swoop, it essentially undermined the credibility of an entire blogging community, even though the vast, vast majority of them don't deserve this.
But at the same time, I think this case has served as a very serious alarm bell to journalists to be more serious, to be more skeptical with this huge amount of information and info that is flooding our emails and flooding the websites.
Mainstream media outlets can get help sorting social media fact from fiction on the Syrian story. There are sites that aggregate information, help journalists verify it, or debunk videos like the one that landed in Osama Manajad's inbox.
First we realized these are not clear number plates. They don't look the same shape as the Syrian number plates. And after verifying the video and checking the different similar videos, we discovered this was shot in Lebanon a few years ago and wasn't even filmed in Syria, and this is one incident of many.
A video can tell you a lot about a situation. It may not tell you immediately where it took place or when, but the fact that you've got something to scrutinize it's something that you can hand off to people who are experts in the region, and they can help ascertain whether this video seems realistic or not.
But also, I think the Amina story reminds us that Twitter and Facebook and other online websites, they're not news agencies. This information is put forward by activists, and they are part of the story. They're not journalists.
There is all kinds of deception in the Arab uprisings. In Bahrain, an opposition newspaper, Al Wasat, was taken to court by the government for printing 6 erroneous stories that the government or its supporters have been accused of planting in the first place. The paper is now out of business. Activists accuse the Syrian government of using similar tactics.
They will send videos to the networks of activists who are covering the story in Syria, false images or information, and hoping that they will be picked up by mainstream media. Then they will show the fact that these are false videos and show you the proof. And then they will convince the Syrian public inside that the news reporting on Syria are not really, in fact, true.
Tom McMaster was outed by a website, electronicintifada.net. The team there grew suspicious of the gay girl character, traced web addresses to a physical location in the U.S., checked property records there, and examined photographs on the site. That led them to an American academic based in Scotland.
What we did in terms of uncovering the hoax could have been done by other media organizations. It's funny, you're one of the few journalists who called to ask us, how did you uncover this hoax? Many others were calling to find out, how can we get hold of Tom? They're more interested in chasing the sensational story, getting the first big interview with the hoaxer.
The Gay Girl blog also played to Western prejudices about the Muslim world. An apparently compelling case of one woman, a Syrian lesbian, calling out an Arab government not known for progressive social policies. It fit perfectly into the dominant media narrative.
I think the main trap is that it's very easy to be skeptical of a government statement. But when you have a story coming to you from Twitter and Facebook, very personal, very emotional, you tend to let your guard down, and that's where we really have to be vigilant. We really have to stick to our standards and always, always check.
I think less sensationalism, less willingness to swallow a story just because it's attractive and fits certain political agendas and Western notions of what ought to be, and more care would really be a lesson I hope media organizations would take from this.
In what he called his last post on a now defunct blog, Tom McMaster wrote,
I want to turn the focus away from me and urge everyone to concentrate on the real issues, the real heroes, the real people struggling to bring freedom to the Arab world. I have only distracted from real people and real problems. Those continue. Please focus on them.
He sounded genuinely remorseful, although given his track record, who knows what he really feels? Who, for that matter, really knows who even wrote this? It's enough to make your head spin. Our Global Village Voice is now on the problem with social media as a source of news and information.
Journalists have been shut out of the Syria story. Journalists have been banned from entering Syria. And so we've been clutching at anything that we can get our hands on. And the problem with that is that a lot of the fact-checking, a lot of the basic journalism skills have been cast aside. What this is going to teach us is that unless we up our game in covering this Syria story, we're really going to be hoaxed and caught out a lot more in the future.
I do think a large amount of blame, if not an equal amount of blame, needs to be put on mainstream media because, let's face it, what a convenient little soundbite Amina's story makes. And they're the ones who chose to push the story into the headlines and to keep it there.
It was really infuriating for me to find out that this person was a hoax. I think that it was embarrassing for me as a reader of the blog, but it was also personally insulting because I think that it doesn't matter how much you feel that you might relate to a cause or a marginalized community, you can never, ever speak for those voices.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. It looks like the Turkish and Spanish arms of the cyber activist group Anonymous aren't as anonymous as they made themselves out to be. Turkish police have arrested 32 people suspected of belonging to the group, which was recently linked to a cyber attack on the country's telecommunications watchdog. Anonymous had claimed it was also behind a series of cyber attacks on Turkish public servers after the Erdogan government announced plans to introduce internet content filters which would allow it to censor web access in the country. In Spain, 3 alleged members of the group were arrested simultaneously in Barcelona, Valencia, and Almeria. Spanish police said the arrests were the culmination of an 8-month-long investigation. Anonymous made a name for itself last year when it said it was behind the distributed denial of service attacks on Amazon, PayPal, and MasterCard after those companies tried to choke off the funding of the whistleblowing website WikiLeaks by withdrawing their services. An Indian crime reporter has been gunned down in broad daylight in Mumbai. Jyotirmoy Dey was an investigative reporter for the Mumbai tabloid Midday and had a reputation for hard-hitting investigative reporting of the city's criminal underworld. Mumbai's organized crime gangs are among the list of suspects, as is a senior police officer. Indian journalists staged a protest over the killing and called for the authorities to do more to protect them. The authorities in Bahrain have already taken action against one of their newspapers. Now they're threatening to sue a British newspaper over its coverage. The Independent is the target of the threat by the Bahraini government for, quote, orchestrating a defamatory and premeditated media campaign, unquote. Bahraini authorities have taken issue with one particular reporter, the Beirut-based Robert Fisk. Fisk wrote about how the ruling Khalifa family had started a fraudulent trial against doctors and medical workers who have been treating injured and wounded protesters. Fisk also wrote that Bahrain is no longer the kingdom of the Khalifas. It has become a confederated province of Saudi Arabia, from which all journalists should in future use the dateline Manama occupied Bahrain. 40 years later, there's a footnote to one of the most famous news leaks of all time. The Pentagon Papers have finally been released in their entirety. The 7,000-page document, once highly classified by the U.S. government, has now been made available to the public by the National Archives in Washington. The release coincides with the 40th anniversary of the New York Times first publishing the material. The papers detailed America's involvement in the years leading up to the war in Vietnam and revealed how successive presidents had misled the public and Congress. The papers were leaked to the Times by Daniel Ellsberg, a U.S. military analyst who had turned against the war. The impact of the leak was explosive, a huge media outcry, public protests, and lawsuits. Speaking after this latest release, Ellsberg said he wished that more people would come forward to release information that could stop wars, and he called alleged modern-day whistleblower Bradley Manning, accused of leaking secret U.S. military files to WikiLeaks, his hero. South Africa's best-known political cartoonist has fallen foul once again of the ruling African National Congress Party and its leader, President Jacob Zuma. We featured Jonathan Shapiro on the Listening Post. He draws under the pen name Zapiro and is known for his cutting-edge, spare-nothing, and no-one satire. Zapiro is being sued by President Zuma for this cartoon, which depicted him preparing to rape Lady Justice. Zapiro called that a metaphor for the abuse of justice that allowed the president, who had been acquitted of rape charges in 2006, to take office. Despite that lawsuit, Zapiro has just published this cartoon in the Mail and Guardian newspaper, again showing the president preparing to assault not Lady Justice, but free speech in South Africa. The cartoon relates to the ANC's proposed media laws that critics argue threaten freedom of the press. Zuma's party is reportedly seeking legal advice on how to deal with the matter. 17 years ago, the small East African country of Rwanda was living through a nightmare, a genocide. In the space of just 100 days, nearly 20% of the population was wiped out, something like 800,000 people. The killing spree occurred over an ethnic power struggle and was triggered by hate speech broadcast by a Rwandan radio station. In Kigali now, you will find that journalists are still dealing with the consequences of the media's central role in that story. The government often cites what happened in 1994 to justify the restrictive media laws that are in place today. And governments elsewhere in Africa also use the specter of Rwanda's tragedy to limit reporting on their own patch. The Listening Post's Nick Muirhead now on the state of Rwanda's media.
Rwanda, 1994. Ethnic tension between the majority Hutu and minority Tutsi has reached boiling point. April 6th, the president, a Hutu, dies when his plane is shot down just outside of Kigali. Then, a Hutu call to arms on radio Mille Collines, or RTLM. Thousands of Hutu extremists pick up machetes and butcher nearly 800,000 Tutsi men, women, children, and moderate Hutus. Today in Rwanda, journalists are still living with the legacy of that genocide. In February, 2 journalists, Agnes Uwimana and Sadati Mukakabibi, were sentenced to 17 and 7 years respectively for publishing articles in the Umaraboya newspaper.
They were accused of endangering public order through the publication of these articles. In addition, the editor, Agnes Uwimana, was also accused of minimizing the genocide, as well as a crime called divisionism, which broadly relates to promoting ethnic divisions, as well as defamation.
Under Rwanda's vague media law, it is a crime to incite discrimination or show contempt to the president. It even forces journalists to reveal their sources when the authorities deem it necessary. The government says, given the media's role in the '94 genocide, the law is justified.
When you talk to Rwandan about 17 years ago, it's like talking about yesterday. And I think that is why you have had the media law of 2002, and it was again amended in 2009, and even now it is under the process of being amended, so that we can have a legal framework that is conducive to the functioning of the media in Rwanda.
But these restrictions come at a price for the media.
Rwandans are no longer supposed to speak about Hutu or Tutsi, so the official policy is that we are all Rwandans. And while this may be in some ways a positive attempt at getting rid of that history of the past where ethnicity was so divisive, in reality in Rwanda today it has acted as a block once again to freedom of expression.
And there are inevitable examples of security forces taking the law too far, with an ever-growing list of Rwandan journalists who claim that they have been victimized by that.
I was covering a story of a house which was being demolished. So when I was taking the pictures, some police officers attacked me. They confiscated my cameras, they deleted all the pictures that I had taken. They don't give a reason, they just say that I'm not allowed to take the pictures.
Another case that highlights the government's intolerance of a critical media is that of Jean Bosco Gasasira. The exiled online editor of Umuvugisi was given a 2.5-year prison sentence in absentia, simply, he says, for comparing President Paul Kagame with Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe. The spectre of the '94 genocide is felt in African media well beyond Rwanda's borders. Governments in Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast and Kenya have all been accused by journalists of using what happened in Rwanda as justification to clamp down on reporting by their own media.
The thing that has been most touted about is the function or the action of the Radio Mille Collines in Rwanda that led to the genocide. And we feel this is nothing but scaremongering that governments across the continent are now using as basis to shut down radio stations.
For Rwanda, the dilemma now is finding the balance between media freedom and the safeguards necessary to prevent a repeat of '94. And according to the Paris-based media watchdog group Reporters Without Borders, the government is failing. In its annual index on press freedom, of the 178 countries listed, Rwanda is number 169. And the country's state-run media, where most Rwandans get their information, are part of the problem.
Almost all the current media outlets either put forward the government line or report on issues which are uncontroversial. There's very, very little scope for independent investigation, debate or discussion.
But some things are changing. At the time of the genocide, Rwanda's only TV station was on air for 2 hours a day. There were only a handful of radio stations on air for about 8 hours a day. Today there are 19 radio stations operating around the clock.
Remember that his ministry...
Some, like Contact FM, are privately owned.
His ministry has been merged with another ministry.
Its weekly broadcast, Crossfire, calls itself an open debate on Rwanda's issues that doesn't pull any punches.
His chairman has given him a vote of no confidence.
It's open and it's there and it's in your face. In Rwanda, we don't really have this tradition of having an open debate publicly. People have this, after 94, I think also this self-censorship that they impose to themselves. And we believe that these are things of the past, these are habits of the past.
Part of the new amendments of Rwanda's media law could see journalists move towards self-regulation and away from the government regulation that has been so punitive and restrictive in the past.
These people who are going to self-regulate themselves are Rwandan journalists who know the history of this country, who know the Rwandan people, and so I think that all this is going to be put into consideration, and we shall see a self-regulating media which is vibrant and which is serving the people.
But it will take more than legal reforms, and there has to be a genuine will on the part of the government to tolerate a freer media in the country.
A self-regulating media in a country with so many restrictions on reporting seems a long, long way off. Rwanda is still dealing with the memory of 1994 and the hate crimes of one infamous broadcaster. In Kigali, this is all that remains of Radio Mille Collines, a looming, rusting reminder of something no Rwandan can forget and few can forgive, the genocide that still haunts this country and its media.
More Global Village Voices now on the rules of the media game in Rwanda.
The repression against the media that criticize the power in place has drastically increased since 2010. A journalist has been killed, several journalists have been sentenced to several years of imprisonment, and independent media have been closed down.
Every journalist in Rwanda works under the burden of what is called genocidal ideology. This is the official government policy line on what happened in the genocide year of '94, the relationship between the Hutus and the Tutsis, and about the so-called atrocities committed by the governing group, the Rwandan Patriotic Front. Any journalist who reports counter to the government line on these three issues risks a serious jail term and possibly worse.
In my opinion, self-regulation is good. If the media in Rwanda is regulated by the media practitioners, by the professionals, I think it will have some quite good impact on the way the media does its business, and it will also promote the sense of ownership and responsibility among the media practitioners.
Finally, every society has its rules of behavior, what is or is not acceptable when it comes to interpersonal relations. And the rules for online relationships on sites like Facebook and Twitter are markedly different than what one can get away with in the real world. No, this is not a story about that American congressman, Anthony Weiner. It's our web video of the week. One man in London trying to do on the streets the kinds of things we do on Facebook and Twitter all the time, and finding that the people he encounters consider him to be some kind of offline weirdo. He's got 500,000 hits on YouTube, though, so at least he's a hit in the virtual world. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Hi guys, can I be your friend? Can I write on your wall?
No.
Will you be my friend? Hmm? But I write on all my friends' walls.
I think I'd have to know you before I was your friend.
All my friends have got like 180 friends. I've only got 2.
Yeah?
Would it help if maybe like you looked at my photos? I like your jacket.
Thank you.
I like your sunglasses. Do you like that?
Yeah.
Do you want to comment on it? What's your name on Twitter?
Mark de Libo.
So you use Twitter?
Yeah.
I'm going to follow you.
Okay.
Cool. Well, I'm going to follow you.
Right, okay.
Wicked, cool.
Great.
All right, thanks a lot. Nice one. Thanks,
Okay.
guys. Yeah. Wicked. Bye. Cheers. Wicked. All right, thank you. That's great. Wicked. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye. Oh, you're actually following me.
I'm following you.